it was truly a rock bottom for me. I would have tantrums in the car. I would freak out over one plastic fork. And my husband literally had to like calm me down in a restaurant and said, they didn't hear you. I know you said no plastic fork, but it's fine. Like I literally was there. I couldn't handle anything going, wrong.
Hello, and welcome to the Scientista podcast, where women and science rule. This podcast is all about supporting powerful women who lead with their brains. I'm one of your hosts, behavioral scientist, Dr. Shweta Chakraborty.
And I'm former Assistant Secretary of State, Monica Medina. The Scientista podcast brings you conversations with leaders, changemakers, and cultural figures who are sharing how they use science, facts, and evidence and turn that into real-world impact. And so let's dive in.
We're so excited today to have Anne-Therese Gennari as our guest, aka the Climate Optimist. I've had the pleasure of getting to know her over many years, so it's long overdue that we are having her as a guest on the Scientista podcast today. She's an author, she's a podcaster herself, she's a climate educator, and she's working now to grow the climate movement through shifting the narrative on climate change that's so we can lead with courage, excitement, and not fear. For more than a decade, she's been promoting climate optimism to help people cope with climate change and make decisions to create the climate-just future she believes awaits us. So I think we're in good company, Monica, don't you think? That's pretty much how you do it as well.
That's how we roll.
So, Anne, I don't know how many people will know this. I mean, it's all outlined in your book, and we want to hear all about it. But you really started out as a model before becoming known as the climate optimist. And here at Scientista, we want to know the origin story. So how did this transition happen for you from model to climate optimist? Where was that moment where you felt the shift was taking place?
First of all, thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be here. And yeah, that's a great question. Most people don't know this, but I actually entered modeling with the dream of using that platform to make a difference. I, at the time, was looking at, Victoria's Secret models that had hundreds of thousands of followers and so much influence, and no one spoke up about anything important. And I thought to myself, look at these platforms that are being wasted. And how do you influence pop culture today? Because that's really what I was trying to get to. It's like, I care about the environment. I care about animals. I know there's a different world that we can co-create, but no one is sort of like feeding into that. And so I had the mission to become a model to create a platform to speak from. Now, I was maybe a little bit naive in that. I remember a photographer I worked with in the Bronx. He was helping me develop my portfolio. And he's like, why do you want to get into modeling? And I'm like, because I want to change the world. And he thought that was sweet and naive as a little 20-year-old myself. But I did have that bigger vision and got signed with an agency, try to communicate that to my agents, but they completely did not get that. I'm like, I want to work with brands that are all about the same values, and I want to this and that and this and that. And I was technically sent around town to miss like from anything from like Halloween costumes to I was working as a mannequin at Bloomingdale's and just like pretending to be a doll. Like it was insanity in a way.
Amazing.
And I'm like, this is not what I did, like why I got into this industry. And so pretty early on, I recognized that there was a huge gap in, what I thought could be done in the industry in terms of uplifting models and their thoughts and views and values. And so I came up with the idea of starting my own modeling agency. Got connected with some other people in the world, and was introduced to Valuel Emmanuel, who was in LA. I was in New York at the time. We had a couple of phone calls and said, there's nothing to lose. Let's try this out. And so we founded Role Models Management, which was all about, representing models on a mission, basically. And it took off. It was interesting because it was the year of the Me Too movement. So we launched in February of that year. And then I think come October or whatever it was, the Me Too movement sort of kicked off, and that completely turned the industry on its end. And before that, a model was just a face. You were not supposed to speak up about anything. You're supposed to be a blank slate. And suddenly there was a whole different narrative to people in the industry. And so we were first on the ball of representing models as someone with a voice that can make an impact. So that was where I was heading into, like what I was doing when I was heading into the modeling industry. And then long story short, we ran that agency for about 5 years. COVID happened, 2020 and all that. And I again reflected on what do I really want to do, because I did not anticipate the role of managing models and what comes with that. And it was an incredible experience to learn, coaching other people on how they find their voice and their influence. But I really wanted to be a writer. I really wanted to sort of, share my own insights and help people navigate times of uncertainty and difficulty and find hope in that. And so I came back to my own work in climate optimism that I had been building over the years and said to myself, okay, it's time for a shift. And I really want to take everything I've learned, put it into a book, put it into teachings, and help other people come to the same realization that I had come to over the years.
That's a beautiful story. Wow. So great. Your transformation is amazing.
Thank you.
And this term climate optimism, right? It was misunderstood. You've talked about this potentially in the beginning. How did you overcome that accusation of this potentially being greenwashing? How did you have that confidence? I remember when I started calling myself a climate behavioral scientist, for example, everyone was like, a what? But you have to claim that identity and own it, and maybe even break the glass ceiling so you can have others, which is a point of pride for you, right? That call themselves or refer themselves to as climate optimists. So how did you take that term, own it, and push back on any accusations of greenwashing?
Well, for one, I wanted the term to be a little bit provocative because people turn their heads and say, what do you mean? Like, what's climate optimism? Tell me more about it. And to your point, yes, people came after me and said, there's nothing to be optimistic about. We can't afford it. In fact, like a couple of weeks after my book came out, there were numerous headlines about climate optimism is dangerous, it's irrational, we can't afford it, and it's not real, yada, yada, yada. And at first I was, a little bit raw in that. I'm like, I just wrote a book about how to become a climate optimist, and now people are pointing out that we can't be one. And something was really not hitting a chord with me in that I'm like, there must be something that they're missing. So I read the articles and I realized they're all missing the point of what climate optimism truly is. And so what I'm really trying to make people realize today specifically is that optimism is not a mindset or an attitude, it's a practice. And so as with any practice, it's like, do we choose to show up for it? Do we want to do the work? What does optimism mean? And so it really led me to anchor down on and read up even more about like, what is the behavioral psychology, to your point, Sweta, behind optimism? What is the neuroscience? What happens in our brains when we allow ourselves to be optimistic and when we practice optimism? And so we can get into that as a whole can of worms to open, but it's basically saying we cannot afford not to be optimistic because optimism is such a evolutionary tool that we have as human beings, the fact that we can even have an optimistic outlook on what our possibilities look like. And so, in my opinion, you can be radical. And if you want to be radically optimistic, because otherwise we don't have time for that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The psychology behind all of this, behind movements and behind the climate movement really matters. And it is at the heart of the criticisms of the climate movement and at the heart of what keeps people from being more active, which is either denial, which we started to talk about, or the feeling of hopelessness, like you can't overcome it, so why even try? And that is the worst. In fact, I've heard a lot of climate leaders say the biggest challenge facing us in the climate movement isn't all of the technology and all the things we have to reinvent. It's our own cynicism about climate change and our ability to make a difference and to make change happen. So talk about that. Let's, dig a little bit more into how do you turn optimism into action? What is the real way to avoid those pitfalls of either denial, just trying to tell yourself it's not really happening, which is what the other side is doing right now, or the cynicism of there's no way to fix it. It's too big to fix.
That's a big question. And I think to start out, we have to just sort of sit with a theory of change, right? Like, what is it that we're currently facing? And it's change. I think we tend to forget that what we're needing right now is the courage to act upon change. And so something I say in my book and that I like to reiterate is that we have to act on climate change, not because we're afraid of what will happen if we don't act, right? Like the whole doom and gloom of if we don't take action, this is going to come. But what will happen if we do take action? But either or, there's change involved, and people have a hard time, or historically has had a hard time with change. And so I think it comes back to just like, how do we find the courage to explore different realities? And psychologically, I like to paint climate change as a storm approaching on the horizon. You can say it's a comet coming towards Earth, but I like the storm analogy because it's something we can relate to. And if you go back to like thousands and thousands of years before we had any modern technology to keep us safe in the face of a storm. We were very much told by our brains to say, okay, what can I do to keep myself safe? Because I see a storm is coming. There is a threat involved in that, and there is uncertainty. I don't know exactly when it will hit. I don't know how long it's going to last, the damage it will cause. And because there's a threat and there's uncertainty, we're actually wired to think conservatively, to gather whatever we have at our fingertips, if that's food and firewood, and crawl back into our caves and stay put and wait things out. Like, that's literally what our brains are telling
That's
us
so
when
amazing.
there's a threat coming, right?
Right. We
But
have to
we
fight
know,
that, right?
right, and we know right now we can't stay here because by the time we crawl out, there won't be any world left to live in, sort of. And so what we really are facing in this moment is the courage needed to venture out in the face of a storm. So, like, we do have to trust that there is a better world to look for. We have to start to, like, let's leave the status quo. Let's go and search for something better. But that is psychologically hard for us. And so when it comes back to the question, like, how do we turn optimism into action? It's recognizing that right now it's called for inner leadership. It calls for trusting that better ways are possible, even if we don't have the evidence for it yet. We have to start acting upon and making decisions based on the future that we want to see emerge versus the world as we know it from yesterday, because we know that world is only going to keep leading us back to the cave, right?
Right.
And so that is why this moment is so challenging, and why we need optimism, and why we need to recognize that optimism is a practice. And so I developed something called the Climate Optimist Venn diagram, recognizing the three most important pillars to sort of continuously nurture your optimism. And it is the inner development work, so tending to your own inner leadership. It is the taking action part. So whatever that looks like for you, finding what brings you joy, what sparks you, what gets you motivated, and then it's doing it in community with others. So recognizing that we're
Love
here
that.
to co-create
That's such
what
a
comes
great
next.
formula, right?
Yeah. And without that, without the formula, without showing up for it every single day, there is no optimism, because without the work in itself, the inner leadership work, the outward work, there's just wishful thinking or denialism, and that keeps us stuck in where we are right now.
And we need to have those positive emotions to get going, right? What do we get wrong about how emotions shape your Venn diagram and get people motivated to act? Now, as a behavioral scientist, I have my thoughts on this, but I really want to hear from you what we get wrong about how the emotions really shape climate engagement.
Yeah, and I want to hear from you too, Sweta, because this is so interesting. For me, it's just kind of back to that. We keep thinking if we just give people more information, if we make the threat scary enough, if we keep building a future that we're afraid of, people will feel motivated to act. But actually, most of the time, the opposite happens. We just sort of like anchor down even more on what we know to be safe right now, because people feel overwhelmed. If you paint that picture and there is no agency attached to it of like, this is what you can do these steps and you'll be safe, we feel overwhelmed, and it's an easier way to sort of like look the other way. So for me, that's what we get wrong. We don't recognize, to your point, the feel-good feelings, the excitement, the curiosity, the opportunity involved with, okay, what else is possible? What if we can actually look at a better world than what we know today? And right now it's about building those blocks towards the world that we want to see. So that's what's missing, in my opinion, but I would love to hear your thoughts too.
Well, I agree with all of that. I think we need hope sometimes we need to scare people into getting their attention, but ultimately behavior is driven through hope and community group work. And we need to create a narrative. And that's what we're trying to do through Scientista that is positive and inspiring and paints a picture that is equitable. And I know Monica has thoughts on this.
I do.
You love describing this, and
I
it's
love
so needed.
thinking about this as a way to inspire people to kind of orient their lives around sustainability. It's not around loss or I don't think some people may be motivated by thinking this is an existential crisis and we have to run fast, to figure out how to fix it. And I was really interested in, kind of Bill Gates's kind of false framing of sort of walking back the existential nature of it. I think we have to look it straight in the eye. But through collective action, that last part of your formula, I really think we can find a way forward that is both effective and builds community, which is, of course, what makes life special, right?
And I would just underpin that and say telling stories, right? And really getting real world experiences to the audiences that are otherwise hearing numbers. And this is something that you really talk about, Anne. How do you use storytelling to shift mindsets without really sugarcoating what's coming? So we need to be positive. We need to drive hope. We need to drive community engagement. And we have to do that through storytelling.
Yes, and to both of your points too, we do need to spark some sort of urgency because otherwise people might be like, "Oh, that sounds fun, but I can spend my
Right.
energy elsewhere." We have to also make sure that people know that this is something that needs to be,
Addressed.
handled right away.
We
Right,
have to do
addressed.
things. It's
Yeah,
not going to fix itself, and
right.
it does matter.
And also, I will get back to your question, but I think something that people tend to get wrong is that someone the other day is like, "Oh, you're the happy one." I'm like, "No, I'm the optimistic one." They're two different things, right? Like
That's
just
funny.
because you're an optimist doesn't mean that you're always happy, doesn't mean that you never get to be worried, doesn't mean that you never get to be angry. In fact, all those emotions are valid and important, and you use them all as sort of like a beautiful mix of like this is what builds my agency, my willingness to act. And so I think that's something we have to address too. It's like I'm not just dilly-dallying over here because I'm an optimist. It's all about like getting to the core both internally and externally. But to your point about storytelling, one of the biggest barriers for action is that it feels distant, right? It's either distant in space where, oh, I feel bad for the polar bears, or it's awful that these floodings are happening in Asia or whatever, or it's happening in the future. Even if that future is 5 years down the road, it's still not here right now. And so we can emotionally attach to that. Why storytelling becomes so powerful is that we can find a narrative that's close to home. We can talk about something that's happening right now in our own communities. We can talk about how crops in the coming years is going to be difficult because this or that. Finding examples of how climate change is currently impacting your local community or will be impacting it
Your
in the
cost of
coming years.
living. I mean,
The
people
cost
are
of
all about
living,
affordability right now, and
right?
we can think of
Food prices going up, all of it, right? So storytelling is powerful because it cuts through those barriers and gets straight to the core. And we are emotional beings. We make, I think I might butcher the number, I think so close to like 90. No, that's another number. Majority of our decisions are based on emotional
yeah.
feelings, right? It's not rational. It's back to like the primitive of, what feels right and what motivates me. And so that's why storytelling is powerful because it gets through to the heart that makes decisions. It's also how you get someone on board. And so I think mixing, a little bit of like, oh, this is scary, we should act and you should care with, but this is what happens when we come together and work towards it together. And once you get someone on board and they feel invited, they don't feel shamed, they don't feel pointed at, it's just recognizing that the world as we live in has been built for thousands of years in a way that isn't going to continue to sustain us. And right now is a moment of reckoning that we have the information that we can act upon. And we are here to participate in that. We have an opportunity right now to make our lives matter in a way that it probably have never mattered in history because we can completely flip this on its end and build a better world moving forward. But it comes to choosing to do so, and we can do that with others. And so if we can find a narrative that invites people in to want to participate without feeling shamed into it, without feeling pushed into that, I think we're really onto something quite
Yeah.
powerful.
And so, I mean, a lot of this is discussed in your book, The Climate Optimist Handbook. And we know that these are the kinds of writings and shows that are popular with audiences right now. So we know that Nikolai Coster-Waldau, best known for The Kingslayer and Game of Thrones, is just launching his second season of An Optimist Guide to the Planet. And so this is resonating, this type of storytelling. So tell us how you really launched this, right? Because at the time of your publishing, this wasn't necessarily, like we talked about in the first question, this wasn't necessarily something that was known. It was disruptive at the time. So what was missing in the climate space when you published it? And now, from when you published it to today, when we're seeing these additional, Optimist Guide to the Planet, et cetera, coming out, what do you think has closed the gap? Do you think we're more optimistic now than we were when you first published?
Well, for one, when I first decided to finally finish the book, I'd been writing it for almost a decade, I kept coming back to the fact that people did not want to even talk about climate change because it was so infused with the doom and gloom, the shame, the blame, all of it, that just made people want to turn elsewhere. And I
Right.
don't blame them, right? And so for one, I was like, okay, there needs to be a book that's easy enough to read where not everyone is going to nerd out on every climate science book that's out there. Like I have a full library, but that's not most people. So how can you gain a little bit of knowledge about climate change without having to know all of it? So just a little bit of baseline, like this is the introduction of what we're facing. But I wanted to really focus on the reader itself. And so that's my intro to the book. This is not a book about climate change. It's a book about you. Like that really is what it is. And I wanted to
I
help.
love that. That's a great way to bring people in. right?
Right. It's like, I recognize you, I see you, I understand these are challenging times, but it can also be beautiful times of opportunity. And I want you to feel like you're participating in that moment. That really is my invitation for anyone who reads this book. And I want it to be easy, short chapters so you can read one before you fall asleep or while you're waiting to pick up your kid from dance class or whatever it is. It's like, bring it with you, read a chapter, feel motivated to take some more steps. So it's really a handbook, truly, about what does it look like to live through these times and how can we show up with agency and optimism. At the time, I wrote the book because no one was talking about it in the terms of what's possible. It was always about, like, again, the more awareness should bring more action. And I just didn't see that happening. And so I wanted the book to be different in that regard. What's happened since the book came out, there has been, it was interesting. No one was talking about climate optimism. And after my book surfaced, I'm not saying it's my book, but suddenly climate optimism became
Sure.
like a
Yeah.
term and people are using it. And I love that. And then the pushback came because I think people were missing the mark. It was all about, if I share some good news stories that happened this past week, feel better about the future. And that is a dangerous narrative because if we only rely on the outside world to provide us the optimism, first of all, we might feel like, oh, look, there's nothing to worry about. We are heading in the right direction. And we're missing the point that, like, well, there's still like 98% of bad news out there, right? Maybe that's wrong. I'm just making up a number. But it's missing the point that, like, the agency or the people participating isn't there. And so they miss the part, again, that optimism is a practice. You can't just rely on the world to give you that for you. And so that was the one thing I've noticed in, like, climate optimism is more prevalent today, but I'm missing the point that it's a practice. And secondly, I think what I see even more and what my work focuses on more and more these days is that inner leadership work. It's that we have to leave the caves, we have to explore new territory. And that takes continuous inner work. It takes trust, it takes courage. There will be days when it's hard. We might meet roadblocks, we might be introducing new ideas and people just turn them down at the table. And that is going to continue to ask from us that we show up for ourselves in a way that nurtures that inner leadership that can guide us forward. And so I think that's the biggest shift from when I wrote the book to what I'm seeing today is the agency that we can cultivate and how do we do so?
That's exactly what we're trying to do here at Scientista is cultivate that agency among a whole great swath of women and their supporters around the country to help us. And I think one key group is moms. And you talked a minute ago about picking up your kid and, thinking about this. I know being a mom shaped some of your views. So talk about how do we appeal to moms specifically because they're obviously a key demographic right now and they don't want to be afraid. They're falling for the false narrative, the false optimism of, oh, it'll all be okay. Just get in and drive your gas car, your giant gas guzzling car some more. How do we appeal to them and bring them into the fold? I think it's a really important question. We've talked a little bit about the ways climate impacts kids and families, but how have you approached this?
For one, I was terrified of having kids at first, so something shifted for me a few years ago, and I now have two. They're about, well, my second one's about to be one, and then my other one is
Aw,
three.
cute.
So it's,
I remember
I've,
seeing you at Climate Week, like 8 months pregnant.
yes, twice. I've been like that twice. Yeah. So I'm pretty new to it also. I've been in it for a few years and my life has, as everyone with kids will say, completely changed, right? The biggest shift that's happened for me is that I feel so much more in tune with myself, where being a mom and just the hands-on, like, life that you have, like, you can never, like, anything is always about, like, the kids first and can I even go use the bathroom right now? Like, are they safe? Sort of, it really forces you to bring life back to, like, the smallest. I'm trying to, how do I explain this? I live life here and
Right.
now in a whole different way that I did before. It just forces me into the present moment. And that has been a beautiful reawakening of, wow, this is what life is about. And so I see the small, like the magic in the small moments. I see the magic in my daughter learning about things. And when she runs up to hug a tree, it's just my whole heart is exploding, right?
That's so
She
great.
does. She's like, oh, honey, mom, should we hug this tree? And I'm like, yes, we need to.
The
So I
ultimate
love
next
that.
generation of tree huggers.
Yes, truly. And so for one, the obvious answer is as moms and parents, we have this beautiful opportunity to shape the next generation. And I don't think we really truly recognize how powerful that is. Like, really, in everything that we do, how we talk to our kids, what we invite them to, that shapes what the world of tomorrow, because they're our future, right? But of course, we need to have action now, and I think that's where the anxiety comes in with moms. We recognize that, will my kids even have a future, right? Like, what will their world look like when they grow up? And that brings a lot of anxiety to myself as well. And it comes back to what we talked about, is finding a way to participate. There are amazing mom groups out there, like Moms Uprising,
Yeah, Clean Air
parents
Moms.
like Clean Air Moms. Thank you. Like
Moms.
my sleep deprived brain is like blanking right now, but you can probably maybe list them in the show notes. There's some incredible organizations to be a part of. And I think as a mom too, we really tapped into our communities. If that's our school community, maybe there's a church community, maybe there's just like a local cleanup, whatever around you that you can participate in. I think it's back to just feeling like we can do anything. And so that's where the practice of optimism comes in. And something that I have been forced to do is recognizing that the quote unquote outward work has had to not stall, but really take a back burner sometimes, because right now my full-time job is being a mom, is raising 2 kids, and it's been hard to navigate because I'm like, oh, there's so much work I need to do in this world and I'm needed elsewhere, but I'm really needed right here. And I think it kind of ties into the work that we do. We try to always go so big and have impact so far away, but the biggest impact we can have is right here in our communities. It's the people's closest to us. It's in our neighbors and how we, nurture those conversations. And that's really where the work happens. And so I think as a mom, don't feel bad that, okay, I'm just home taking care of my kids, because that is a beautiful opportunity to really immerse yourself in the community around you and the work that you can be doing at your doorstep, at the neighbor's doorstep, and in your town.
I do think moms can change the narrative. Moms themselves who believe that we have to take climate action can be the catalyst for change among their mom groups. I really do. So if you're a mom
Yeah.
out there listening, take heart. You have a lot more power than you think, just by your example and the words that you use and the way you talk about both being optimistic, but the urgency for your kids.
And speak about opportunity for storytelling, right? If you talk to your mom groups or other moms in your class or whatever, like talk about the future, because of course they're going to relate to that. It's their own kids. Of course they won't be able to turn away because you're talking about,
Their
the things
kids,
they care
right.
most about, right? And so there's a beautiful opportunity to onboard them to say, why don't we come together and do something? Like, let's figure out what we can do in our community. Like, what can we do to make an impact? So yeah.
And is this what you're finding, Anne? Are you finding that this is what your peers, mothers or otherwise, are craving emotionally and socially right now? What, through the community that you've built, through your writing, speaking, and online presence, what are you finding?
Yes, I am finding this deep need for community, of having anyone just to share thoughts with, right? Like, okay, I'm navigating this. This is hard for me. That kind of support. I see people being drawn back to community in a whole different way that I haven't experienced in a while. And then just the fact that people are interested in the practices of climate optimism tells me that they want to figure out how they can activate their leadership. What does it look like to embody that leader that their community needs, and how do they do that? So just a support group of learning with others, I've seen a strong need for in just recent months. And when it comes to moms and people just in my immediate world, I'm sensing a new way of wanting to engage. It used to be we're like, oh, I know climate change is real, but let's not talk about it because it's too hard. Now it's more, okay, what can we do? Like, tell me, what can we do? What can be done? And that new sort of willingness to act is so both grounding and optimistic. And I think we have to just feed into that optimism even more.
I've been really struck when we pulled together our Scientista pop-ups in places, how much people really are, especially now when we feel kind of outnumbered or marginalized in the climate world or the environmental community, how much power there is in coming together as a community, and how much that builds community and confidence that we can make a difference. Obviously, what we're trying to do here with Scientista, I know that's what you're trying to do.
Final question for you. Actually, before we get to the final question, we lost a luminary in our
Yes,
field in
we
2025.
need to ask
We
you
lost
about
Jane
her.
Goodall. And you had her endorse your book. So talk to our audience about what that meant for you, what she meant to you.
So we should name her. Her name
Yes,
is Jane
Jane.
Goodall.
Did I not say Jane Goodall?
I love that you assumed that people would just know. That's beautiful. But we did
In
lose
my head, I said her name.
Yes, see, which is in our hearts, in our heads. So Jane Goodall passed away. It was, wow, I think we're always shocked. And I felt it emotionally that when she left the earth. I don't know if you can relate, but what a beautiful person on this earth. And yes, she did endorse my book. It's a wild story. I'll keep it short. My book was about to publish. I was at the time 7, 8 months pregnant with my first child, and I knowing that I needed people to endorse my book because that's important. And I was like, what's the list? Like if I were to dream big, and Jane Goodall was on top of it. I've always admired her and couldn't think of a better person to put my name, whose name to put in my book. And then I was actually in Germany doing a podcast with BMW, and one of the people I was talking to, chatting with in between interviews, mentioned that he was working for the Jane Goodall Institute in Germany. And I thought, oh, there's connection. Like I don't know. And I'm like, I can't ask. It's too big of an ask. Anyways, came home and then I sent him an email like, is there any chance? And he responded to say, I give it to her VP. I can't promise anything. She's very busy. And that was it, right? And then weeks went on, months went on. My book was about to be published. And I thought, I can't wait any longer. I have to just send it out. The book published, my daughter was born. I was sitting in my floor in New York, having a little bit of a panic moment because I realized my book just published and here I am sitting on the floor with my baby and I should probably be out promoting my book. But then I sent a prayer of trust. I said, I just trust that whoever's supposed to read this book will find it. And there's, nothing I can do right now anyways, than just trust that it will find its way. Literally minutes later, I got a text back from that guy and he said, keep your eyes peeled. Jane Goodall just got back to us. She has a few hours or a few days. She's home for a few days. She finally has time to read your book. And then I opened my inbox. I had a personal note said from Jane. And so I sent her my book. She, skimmed through it a little bit, read some chapters. She wrote this beautiful testimonial. And then she also wrote me a personal note because I had a responder on my email to say I was home nursing and nesting with my baby, my newborn. And so she responded the most beautiful words about making the most time with this baby. And it just hit my heart so deeply. The fact that she took the time, the fact that she endorsed my book. I am forever grateful how the universe lined up that happened. I'm proud that I took the courage or found the courage to act upon it. And I don't know, it felt a little guided. It felt like the universe wanted to have my
That's
back.
beautiful.
Yeah, that is beautiful. It was meant to be. So our last question is always about the opposite. What happens or what have you done? Tell us a story about a time in your career or on your path when things didn't turn out how you planned. Life throws you curveballs. What's the best way to deal with that? And tell us a story about how you overcame some challenge that you weren't expecting, just to help our listeners know it's possible.
Oh gosh, to pick one. The challenges, oh gosh, there's so many. I would say an overarching theme, for one, when I first became quote unquote a climate optimist, I went the wrong way and tried to just block out all the negative news and only focus on the positive. And I embody what I call toxic positivity, and I have never been more anxious. It was truly a rock bottom for me. I would have tantrums in the car. I would freak out over one plastic fork, and my husband literally had to calm me down in a restaurant and said, "They didn't hear you. I know you said no plastic fork, but it's fine." I literally was there. I couldn't handle anything going wrong. And so that's when I recognized the need for the deeper inner work, that we live in a very dysfunctional world. There's no way of being perfect in that world. And so the way forward is for focusing on ourselves first and building up that light that can continue to nurture and guide us. And I would say in recent years, if I can give one more answer, is that stress around, okay, I'm now a mom. I cannot work as many hours as I used to. I feel like I should be out in the world preaching my message, but here I am sitting in the dark room nursing. And the stress that comes with but this is urgent. I need to be out there doing more work. It has really forced me to understand the importance of creating space. And we tend to overlook this as quote unquote activists because we feel like the work is so urgent, it needs to be scaled up, it needs to happen faster. But then we're just running the hamster wheel, and there are chances that we just keep running into the same roadblocks. And so for us to even give space for imagination, to wildly reimagine what the world of tomorrow could look like, to come back to that source of curiosity, of creativity, of optimism, we need to really stop by slowing down and creating this space to even invite that to unfold. Because yes, we can read more articles, we can share more information, but then we're just reiterating the world as we know it. And even with AI can give you answers faster than we could ever imagine, but it pulls from information that we already know. And so how do we pull forward the world of tomorrow, the things we haven't even seen yet? I love this quote by Mary Oliver, keep some room in your heart for the unimaginable. And so how do we create room in our hearts for the unimaginable? How do we build trust in that unimaginable can actually happen, even if we can't yet see it? So that's what I've come to, is that it's a radical act to slow down and create the space where imagination can unfold. And so
I love
for anyone who's
that.
listening,
I love that. That
beautiful.
is so beautiful. And it's a great thing to think about as we enter kind of the end of the year and the new year, thinking about the, continuing to keep that flame on for what's, out there what might be possible.
Well, Anne, thank you so much for joining us. We will bring you back again because
Yes.
Scientista is
And
just
Trace,
kicking
this was
off and we
so
have
much fun.
big plans. And
Thank
I know
you,
you do
guys.
too. And we're well aligned. So we really appreciate it. And for those tuning in and listening, thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please help others discover it by sharing it and giving us a like on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It goes a long way for us. We really appreciate your support.
You can always find us at scientista.world for more stories, updates, and ways to get involved. And believe me, we're going to be coming back to you with more ways that we need you to get involved so that we can grow Scientista and keep that light on about what's possible with our little organization. So thank you, Anne Therese, for giving us this inspiration today.
Thank you so much for having me.